Welcome to The Sensitive One. I'm Gina Susan Long, nutritionist for highly sensitive people. And today you'll be hearing from Roz, a woman who struggled with multiple severe food allergies and intolerances and was living on very few foods for a very long time. It's wonderful when you hear these stories of people with severe food intolerances who actually regain their food tolerance, and Roz is a beautiful example of that. Once again, this interview is not intended as medical advice, so please consult your doctor before attempting anything discussed in this episode. And without further ado, here is Roz to share her fascinating story. You've had quite an incredible recovery story, which is why I wanted to speak to you. And I think that not everyone with a food intolerance who's probably going to be listening to this podcast will have experienced the level of sensitivity that you have with foods. But I think it's the severity of what you've dealt with that makes your story so amazing and also so hopeful, I think, because it illustrates how bad things can get, but also that there's hope. There is a way to move forward and potentially regain tolerance when we have possibly multiple food intolerances. So I want to encourage anyone who's listening to this story to keep an open mind. Once again, this isn't medical advice. It's just a thought-provoking story and something that I recommend educating yourself about if you're not familiar with Helminthic therapy.
It's good to join you, Gina. Yes, I'm quite happy to share because it's made such a difference to me.
It would be great if you could start telling us how your food sensitivity journey began and how bad it got before you actually stumbled on this thing that helped you to get better.
Absolutely. Mine go back right to childhood. I had some sensitivity right from a very young age to milk. And then I disliked milk. It was my body telling me not to have it. I didn't really understand what was going on, but I knew that if I had milk, it made me unwell. That progressed when I was a little bit older, when we're looking sort of 9, 10. I couldn't eat things like sausages or burgers without getting severe stomach pain. Again, as a child, you don't understand these things. You end up avoiding the foods. I have a whole range of background issues in terms of allergies. I have asthma, which developed from the age of 11. I had glandular fever for the first time when I was 12. And I've got an immune deficiency as well. So I was growing up with a fairly compromised immune system. Had the first bout of bronchitis by the time I was 18, 19. I'd had flu as a child, influenza, full influenza as a child as well. But the main problems with foods really started to develop a little bit later as an adult. I had cryptosporidiosis, which is a waterborne problem as a result of an infected water supply. And it left my gut with problems, particularly, first of all, with all dairy products. I couldn't have anything that was dairy. I wasn't very aware of other issues apart from a severe allergy to shellfish. But then as time progressed, and we're now looking at probably into my sort of by about the age of 30, I was developing more and more food intolerances. So one food after another was causing an issue. I'd go to the doctor with symptoms from, I had joint inflammation, which turned out to be caused by dairy products. So if I had anything in the way of dairy products over a prolonged time, it was reacting as though I'd got rheumatoid arthritis. I'd got all sorts of joints that were inflamed and struggling. I started to develop migraines, and little by little, different foodstuffs were affecting me. I was getting cramps from some foods, headaches from others, sickness, diarrhea. Some things were bringing me out in rashes, literally from head to toe. And the list of things I couldn't eat was growing. I'd gone through all of the regular visits to doctors, visits to hospitals. I'd had food allergy testing, which confirmed that I'd got both IgE responses to some things, as well as the fact of food intolerances going on. And I'd got to the point where About 6 or 7 years ago, I was down to only being able to eat 26 different food items. And that was including things like lamb and chicken as separate items, not that meat was an item.
And you said salt as well, didn't you, Rose?
Salt is one of those 26. Sugar was one of the 26. And I
Mm.
really, rice was one of the 26. So I was starting to get to a point where I could eat no vegetables. Every vegetable I ate made me ill. There were a limited number of fruits that I could still eat and a limited number of other things. So it meant no eating out. It meant no buying any processed foods. I had to cook everything from scratch. I'm also very chemical sensitive, so was having to have organic foods. Even small amounts of things could make me ill, including chemicals in the water supply. If I drank tap water or had anything that had been made with tap water, I was ill. So it was getting pretty desperate. And there were still things increasing in terms of reactions. I would end up with migraines on a very regular basis. I have vertigo, which is caused by food reactions, and it would wipe me out for days if I got it wrong. So, eating out was impossible. Even with friends and family, it was almost impossible for me to stay well, and I'd have to take something like a bag of oatcakes in my handbag to make sure there was something I could eat. I then read an article in the magazine of Action Against Allergies, which talked about Helminthic therapy. And my first reaction was this sounded absolutely dreadful and really quite unpleasant. But it gave information on some articles that had been written about it. And I went away and I read those articles. And the more I read, the more I realized there was something here that I had to investigate. And it was fascinating to start to read how helminths give off something which stops the body rejecting them, which actually suppresses part of that inappropriate immune response. And I thought, well, I could see the logic for this. And however much it seemed a gross direction to go in, there was something here I got to look at. So I gave the articles to my husband, who has a science background rather than mine. And I said, "What do you think?" And his first reaction was the same as mine. How dreadful. And then he read all of the background and read some of the scientific reports of what's going on. He said, "You've got to try this." So it was a big step because I'm really not good with creepy crawlies and all sorts of things. So the decision to progress to something that was going to involve putting a patch of larvae on my skin for them to burrow through was a big decision. But I'd got to the point where, what if there were more things I couldn't eat? Where was I going from there? How was I actually going to survive and get a balanced diet, given that there were so many things by that stage I couldn't eat? So I contacted one of the providers and I talked through my situation and I talked through what I should do. And they provided some advice and I decided to start on Helminthic therapy. That's now about 6.5 years ago. And I applied my first patch with fear and trepidation. I found within a matter of a couple of days, my bowel was starting to settle down in a way that it hadn't for a very long time. I didn't at that stage try eating more things, but there was a very direct correlation between my first dose of worms and some improvement with how my body was working. And I followed all the advice, and there are some side effects. I had asthma overnight a few nights, and I slept sitting upright. Not bad asthma, just mild, but enough to want to be upright rather than lying down. I had discomfort where the patch was, but nothing that made me think this wasn't for me. I got through that. At about 10 days, I did have a week of vertigo, which wasn't pleasant, but I stuck with it. I did patches then at 3-month intervals. And after the second patch, I think even, I started to explore one or two foods that had not made me as unwell, and I found I was able to tolerate some. And then as I got through sort of patch number 3, patch number 4, which means that you're about a year into treatment by that stage, I'd started to be able to have quite a wide range of foods that I hadn't eaten for many, many years. By the time of 18 months, I could eat almost a normal diet. I could drink alcohol again, which I hadn't done for a number of years. I could eat chocolate. I could eat cream. I could eat ice cream. I could eat cakes. And it was just amazing. And that 18 months about coincided with my 50th birthday. And we had a fantastic weekend with everything from a meal out in the local pub to cream teas in a place that's well known for its cream teas. And I was able to celebrate in style with foods that I hadn't eaten for probably something like 7 years, some of them a lot longer than that. And it was just tremendous. My journey since then, it's not all plain sailing. You have times where if you don't maintain your worm colony, you know, because you start reacting again to some foodstuffs. I have had times where I have had severe reactions since, but I've generally known what it's to. And there are still some things I avoid. I don't have absolutely everything now. I still avoid things that cause my worst reactions, but in small quantities, even if they make me a little bit unwell, they don't wipe me out for several days, which again is just a huge improvement. So that's where I am now, and it's great. I eat far too much now.
Yes, because you said to me that you'd lost a lot of weight when your diet became really
Yeah.
restricted.
Absolutely, because well, I could put on weight while my diet was restricted, but by eating the wrong things, it wasn't at all healthy. So I was cooking my own oat granola with just oat and sugar syrup. And so my staple when I couldn't eat other things was this oat granola, and it was quite high sugar content. And that's not really healthy in the long term, but I needed it because I couldn't get the calories or the energy from other things. I do have a bag of chocolates on my desk as I speak, which is just fantastic.
Yes, I think the first time we spoke, I got the sense that you love chocolate, and it's probably one of the things
Oh, absolutely.
that's been,
I'm a chocoholic.
yeah.
I have to be careful and restrict myself now, but that's as much about weight as anything. It's not because I can't eat it. When I was at my worst, I could another love of mine is coffee. I couldn't drink coffee. I'd had to give up alcohol. I couldn't drink even socially because it would make me ill.
Okay, what would happen if you had alcohol before?
I would end up with various problems. I'd have the hangover from hell, even from a very small amount. I could end up with migraines. I could end up with vertigo. I could end up with bloating, cramps, all sorts. The reactions, it would aggravate food reactions as well. Food reactions often felt like having a hangover. So, there was a stage where I thought it was alcohol, and actually it was things I was eating.
Yeah, those symptoms that you talk about, I also think they're not symptoms that are probably well understood necessarily to be associated with food reactions. So things like vertigo, things like maybe just feeling
Yeah,
like
well,
you have.
I can't remember the word. It's secondary endo, whatever it is, hydrops is the name of the condition, which is related to Meniere's is what mine was diagnosed as. But I've gone away and researched, and actually, the secondary condition can be caused by allergic reactions, and that's what's happening with mine. And I know if I control my allergy symptoms, then my vertigo stays on an even keel. So, some of the things I'd get very direct response. I'd eat a banana, I'd get severe cramp. So, some you can identify a very direct parallel. That the joint inflammation is one that was very clear.
I was really curious when you said that you started to get the joint pain, and you realized that that was being triggered by food reactions.
That was after having gone through doctor and hospital who did all the testing for rheumatoid arthritis. and sort of looking at other investigations, and it was going away and reading up on the internet about what can cause joint inflammation. And you come across actually dairy can be a big aggravator. So I cut out dairy, and what happens? My joints went down.
Interesting. So the doctor didn't actually tell you about that. You did your own research and then figured that out, and through
Absolutely.
trial and
Yeah.
error, you proved it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've had very little understanding of conditions by the health professionals that I've dealt with. I have now got a very good doctor who's very supportive and has actually asked me to go and talk to her students about allergies and asthma. But prior to that, doctors just would shrug and have no idea. And my previous doctor had written the Helminthic therapy on my notes in sort of speech marks, sort of standing out as, what is this woman doing? And although agreed to treat me, it was with a profound lack of understanding of what this could do.
Okay. So they were supportive, but reluctantly so. Is that the best way to describe it?
They were not they were not unsupportive of my total healthcare, but were not supportive of the Helminthic therapy. The nurses at the local practice, interestingly, were much more clued up and interested than my previous doctor. My current doctor, however, is altogether different, and I would say is supportive.
Did they recognize that your food reactions were causing a lot of these symptoms? So the joint pain, the
Yes,
vertigo.
they've sent me to all sorts of nutritionists, dietitians. I was sent for full allergy testing at one of the university hospitals. So my records are full of what the problems are that have been caused by this. And it was through some of the testing that actually the fact I've got an immune deficiency was identified. That had not otherwise been identified. So it's a path where I don't think here there are many parts of the medical profession that are completely connected up when it comes to things like this. And they don't really know what to do with it.
Did they send you to a nutritionist or a dietitian initially, or was that something that happened further down the track?
It was further down the track when it was starting to be pretty bleak on what I could eat. But the dietitian, to be fair, had not got any experience with allergies. So all she could do was go through the basic food groups to ask whether I was eating the right things, and really wasn't any help. And this has happened twice. There are allergy dietitians who are more effective, but it was more of a tick box exercise and little practical use. I've had to do an awful lot of research on my own.
Because that's one theme that I found quite consistently is that doctors don't seem to refer to dietitians to look for things like allergies or intolerances when patients come in with the kind of symptoms that you talk about.
No,
Yeah, it doesn't happen automatically, and I think there's something needs to change there, maybe in terms of the education, because I find that so many people who have these kinds of symptoms are reacting to foods. It's very common.
absolutely. Yes. I think there's far more people react than are aware that they do, or it will get put down usually by a doctor as irritable bowel syndrome when they don't actually understand what the cause is and they don't know what else to be looking at. So my medical records had said that right from childhood that I had irritable bowel syndrome, but actually I don't. What I actually have is specific food intolerances and allergies.
Did they ever diagnose you with arthritis, or was it just undiagnosed?
No, although I'm due to be seeing somebody again, although can't see them because of the current COVID situation, because I have got some joint degeneration in my well, a number of my joints that I'm waiting to see somebody. But again, I think this is long-term effect of things like food rather than something that will come out as being caused by other things.
Yeah. And, I'm curious to know because it sounds like you started to become sensitive to foods quite quickly, or was it something that happened over quite a long period of time?
It was increasing over a period of 10 or 15 years, from Well, I mean, it's probably been increasing over my lifetime because some of these go back right down to childhood. And I had all sorts of allergy testing done as a child, even in my sort of age 10, 11, 12. There was a specialist at the hospital near where we lived who was undertaking investigations, and I was part of their studies. Um, so I've always had a whole range of allergies, sensitivities, etc. But they just started to escalate in adulthood.
And what kind of allergies were they when you were younger? Were they environmental allergies or was it food as well?
I was diagnosed in the first round of testing as allergic to cats, dogs, rabbits, grass pollen, tree pollen, feathers. I didn't test positive. Oh, and house dust mites. I didn't test positive to horses or mold. So basically, almost everything they tested, I was allergic to as a child. Many of those have continued.
Sorry, many of those have improved?
Well, they've improved now with being on helminths. One of the other things as I've got older is I've had an awful lot of chemical allergies. And one of the ones that has been a particular problem is pine resin, which is in flame retardant and all sorts. And I would find if I picked up a cardboard box and carried it, if it touched my arms, my forearms, I would come out in rashes as though I'd been burnt from contact. When I started on Helminthic therapy, that all became much better as well. I do sometimes get reactions, but it's not nearly as violent as it used to be.
That's fantastic. So some of those environmental and also chemical sensitivities have improved.
Yes,
Yeah, that's such good news for people who are dealing with multiple chemical sensitivity because, it is disabling.
absolutely. Well, I can't lick stamps because the glue that they're made of would give me asthma, or envelopes. It's things like that. I mean, these days actually stamps come already pre-sticky, which is much easier. But envelopes, I can't lick an envelope because I get asthma.
Could you just take us through in a little bit more detail what the process is for infecting yourself with the helminths?
Right. Um, you apply a liquid which contains the larvae to a patch, a plaster, which you put on your arm somewhere that it can basically not be too inconvenient. And they then basically burrow through the skin. So you will get sort of blistering where at the local site where they've gone through the skin, and your immune reaction to them means that there is a reaction at the site level. That lasts for a few days. It's very itchy, but it passes, and that's not so bad. You can treat that with a topical antihistamine type cream
Yeah.
just to sort of take the discomfort away. They then burrow through to find bloodstream and work their way through your body up to your basically to go down into the stomach, which they obviously are very clever at doing. It's an odd process when you're first thinking about the fact of where they are at the moment and on their journey. But after the first couple of patches, you actually don't think about it anymore, and you just apply the patch and you just know it's going to make you feel a lot better. So you just get on with it.
So you mentioned that you had some asthmatic symptoms when you were dosing
Yeah.
initially, and I believe that's associated with larger doses of larvae.
I don't know because I haven't had the symptoms more recently and I'm dosing with lower levels. So it
Mm,
could be. It could simply be that my body is more used to it. I don't know. But it was simply the point at which they were traveling from, I think they come through the lungs and then go down through to the stomach. It's the point at which that they're making that journey from one to the other that you just get a little bit of a throat reaction to what's going on,
yeah,
which for me meant a couple of nights where I was more comfortable upright than lying down.
yeah. And what were the doses like when you started?
The initial doses were 25. Now I dose with 10. And I think the thinking has changed along the way about whether actually you need anything above a sort of 10 dose or whether you start with even 5. It's more about keeping the colony fresh and active than it is about the quantity.
It's about the frequency of dosing rather than
Yes.
the total amount of lava.
Yeah.
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 And so how often do you have to do maintenance doses now?
I do top-up doses at round about the 12 to 13 week mark. I've got one due to arrive any day now, and I'm quite looking forward to it. Because you do get a slight dip in effectiveness, and I have had a bit of a dip recently, but I think aggravated by all sorts of stresses that are going on, which can aggravate symptoms anyway.
Yes, absolutely. So aside from getting a bit of a rash when you apply the larvae, do you get any other side effects from using the helminths?
Some people have some negative stomach reactions for a few days and discomfort. I haven't particularly had that. So my main ones have been the little bit of asthma, the few days of vertigo, and then the rest of it has been largely the benefits.
And obviously very worthwhile.
For me, definitely. There's no way that I would choose to go back to the way that I was. I manage carefully in terms of, dental treatment because things like the injections that they give,
Anesthetic?
the anesthetic, yes,
Yes.
can affect your colony. Some things will affect it for a short period, and it'll bounce back. Some things will affect it longer term. So I try to manage any dental treatment to be just before I do a top up rather than being just after. And also, I have a very, very good dentist who, of all my medical professionals, has been most interested and supportive of my Helminthic therapy. And he's gone away and researched the best ways of dental treatment that won't affect my worm colony.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, he's amazing. So that's really helpful. The other thing is there's an awful lot of information now about things like if you need medical treatment, what will and won't affect the colony. So there are, if you need antibiotics, there are some that are less likely to affect them than others. So I try to stick to the ones that won't have an impact or the impact is slight. And I'm careful. A few weeks ago, I made a mistake. I didn't think, and I had some chicken cooked in coconut milk, utterly overlooking that coconut milk can affect the effectiveness of your worm colony. And I was ill. And for a few days, I couldn't work out what on earth I'd eaten that had affected me. And I'd read through then the care manual, and I went back to the fact that it was coconut milk.
Oh.
So there are things, it's best to avoid.
Where do you get this care manual from and any of these
It's
resources?
online. There is a wiki specifically for Helminthic therapy. So you've got lots of information, people's stories, what to do, what not to do. There's information on dosing. There's all sorts of helpful information available through it.
And research as well, I think.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Research articles. There's some very good stuff in there.
You mentioned that your doctor was accepting but not necessarily supportive of the fact that you
Yeah.
were using helminthic therapy. So they obviously know about it. It sounds like you're seeing a different doctor now. I'm just wondering if you did tell.
The doctor didn't know about it. Most of
Okay.
my medical professionals have not known about it.
Okay.
Some have I've given the articles to so that they can get up to speed. Some have gone away and done their own research. But I do believe there are some universities in the States, I don't know about here, that do teach it on their medical syllabus. So it is now considered in some places. But I think in that regard, the UK is a little bit behind.
There are doctors, I think, on the wiki, actually, there may be a reference to a couple of doctors who do support helminthic therapy. I'm curious about the ones that you have told about it. What was the reaction?
I think Poker Face would describe my first doctor the best on that. He obviously just didn't know what to say and just sat there with a very professional, straight face and didn't respond at all. There was no, it was a completely blank response to it. My current doctor is prepared to discuss it, which is a completely different reaction.
Mm. And what's their attitude in general?
Um, Politely interested, not necessarily at the point that they would be recommending it to people.
Are they interested in the results that you report?
To an extent, but I don't think our doctors generally have the time to look at patients holistically. So I think that there is a it wouldn't be difficult to look at my medical records and see that the number of infections that I have had and the number of problems I've had has gone down since I started Helminthic therapy. There is a direct correlation, but nobody really looks at your records in that kind of detail.
Yeah, and it's ironic that it's an infection that has actually helped you to
Yes,
recover. Yeah. I
yes,
mean, if you want to call
yeah,
it an infection. I think there's a distinction between parasitic worms versus helminths, which are more therapeutic or symbiotic worms. So I think it's important to kind of clarify that. So
absolutely. I think, it's not about having an uncontrolled worm colony. It's not about having any and every type of worm. It is about using ones that there is a very specific reaction physiologically that is of benefit.
and these worms are self-limiting, aren't they? So they can't breed unless they're in the right conditions.
That's correct. They don't reproduce within the body.
And granted that you have normal sewage systems, so you've got a toilet and you're not actually
Yeah.
stepping in
Yeah.
your own waste,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, you can't really reinfect yourself.
Absolutely not.
And we're talking specifically here about Nicator americanus, which is also called hookworm. Is that the one that you used, Roz, or did you use something else?
They are, yes. No, they're the ones.
Okay, so that's very. I think they're the more popular ones, and probably one
Yes.
of the most well researched ones.
I think so. And there have been a number of university studies involving them. So it's not, there are scientific based studies out there as well.
Yes, and I'm going to be speaking to at least one or two researchers about it. So any listeners will get to hear about that research too. So I'm curious to know also, how did the people in your life react to this, or were you open about it first of all, and how have people reacted to it?
To begin with, the only people I told were my parents and my husband, all of whom were very close to the problems that I'd got and therefore were very supportive of me trying something that might help. It didn't take long before people around me were asking what had changed because we go to our local pub for meals and we went from a situation where I couldn't really eat to me being able to eat all sorts of things. And so it was fairly obvious something was different. So I started to have the courage to tell people what it was I'd done. And then little by little, when you realize just the difference it's made, and it is so obvious the difference it's made in your life, then I've been more prepared to be open about it.
How did they receive that?
Oh, it varies from person to person, from the sort of the icky reactions where they'd really rather not know the detail, to people who go away to read the articles and start to think that maybe they could benefit, or they know people who could benefit.
Because this therapy is used for a number of different autoimmune and allergic
Yes.
conditions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are reluctant to try it. I think it depends how desperate they've got in terms of symptoms as to whether they are prepared to do something that actually on the face of it does sound pretty unpleasant. But there comes a point where if you've run out of other options, what have you got left to lose?
And I think the fact that it's fairly easy to take an anti-worming medication and get rid of
Absolutely.
these
Yeah.
particular worms.
Yeah.
So in that sense, that helps to manage the risk associated with it.
Yes. Absolutely. So you've always got that safety net.
If anyone's listening to this and they're interested in maybe finding out more information about helminthic therapy and potentially using this therapy, is there anything that you would recommend to that person?
There's all sorts of very good articles out there and research papers, but the one that I went away and read was one that had been run by the Guardian newspaper in the UK some years ago now, about Jasper Lawrence's journey with helminths, and it's a well put together article that will give quite a lot of background and worth reading.
Okay, so do more research.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you would like to add to this, Roz, or anything else you'd like to share?
I don't think so. I mean, it has made a huge difference for me. I love the fact that I can eat more normally again.
Do you find that you have an improved sense of well-being in general as well?
Oh, completely. It's made a big difference. I'm ill less often as well, not just the reactions to food, but when my body reacted to foods, my immune system would not be able to fight other infections. So I was picking up things very regularly, and I had more courses of antibiotics for things wrong with me than is sensible for any human. And I'm not in that position anymore, and it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's great when we can get older and get better at the same time, isn't it?
Let's hope it continues.